New York, 1945. The Red Cross worker opened the donation boxes at the Displaced Persons Center, pulling out dresses' floral prints, soft fabrics, colors that seemed impossibly bright after years of gray uniforms. She offered them to the teenage German girls standing in line, expecting gratitude, maybe tears of relief. Instead, the girls stepped back, their faces showing fear rather than joy. The youngest, maybe 14, whispered in broken English, "We are not permitted. We were taught femininity is weakness. Dresses make you target." What had been done to these children during the war's final years would prove more disturbing than anyone expected. The spring rain drummed against the windows of Ellis Island's processing center, where thousands of displaced persons passed through in 1945's chaotic aftermath. Europe had collapsed, its population scattered, its children orphaned or separated from families by the war's final convulsions. Among the refugees were groups of teenage girls from Germany, traveling without parents, without guardians, their paperwork identifying them as auxiliary service members or youth organization participants who'd been caught in the war's machinery and spat out on American shores. Sarah Mitchell worked for the Red Cross, coordinating relief efforts for displaced children. She was 36, from Boston, had spent the war years organizing humanitarian aid, and thought she'd seen every variation of trauma that conflict could inflict. But the German girls who arrived in May 1945 presented something she hadn't encountered: a systematic attempt to eliminate femininity itself, to transform teenage girls into something harder, more useful, more suited to total war's demands. There were 12 of them, ranging from 13 to 17 years old. They wore identical clothing, rough wool trousers, heavy boots, shapeless jackets that obscured body contours. Their hair cut short in a style that made gender ambiguous from a distance. They moved with military precision, standing at attention when addressed, responding in unison when questions were asked, maintaining formations even during informal moments when such discipline wasn't required. Mitchell had arranged for clothing donations, dresses, skirts, blouses, the standard items that charitable organizations collected for refugee girls. She'd set up a distribution area with privacy screens where girls could try on clothes, select items that fit, begin the process of reclaiming civilian identity after years in various wartime programs. But when she invited the German girls to approach, they didn't move. They stood rigid, staring at the dresses with expressions that mixed longing and fear, desire and trained revulsion, as if the clothing represented both salvation and forbidden temptation. "Please," Mitchell said, gesturing to the racks of dresses, trying to convey warmth and permission through tone since her German was limited. "These are for you. You can choose whatever you like. Different sizes, different colors. Find something that makes you feel comfortable." The girls exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, the oldest, a girl named Greta Schneider, according to paperwork, spoke in careful English. "We are not permitted to wear such clothing. It is improper. It makes one weak, visible, vulnerable. We were taught that femininity is obstacle to strength, that girls who wish to serve must eliminate female characteristics, must become hard like soldiers." Mitchell felt something cold settle in her chest. She'd heard about youth programs in Germany, about militarization of childhood, about ideology that had reshaped every aspect of civilian life. But hearing a 17-year-old girl explain that dresses were forbidden because femininity was weakness, that revealed depths of psychological damage she hadn't anticipated. "The war is over," Mitchell said gently. "Those rules don't apply anymore. You're allowed to be girls again, to wear dresses if you want them, to look feminine without fearing punishment or judgment." "But we were taught for years," another girl said, younger, maybe 15. "From age 10 to now. Every day, instructors told us that soft girls are useless, that the nation needs strong women who can work and fight and sacrifice, that beauty and femininity are indulgences that weak societies permit. We learned to see dresses as symbols of failure, of being the kind of girl who cannot serve, who is burden rather than asset. The story emerged slowly over the following days as Mitchell and other aid workers conducted interviews, documented backgrounds, tried to understand what these girls had experienced and what they needed for recovery. They'd all been members of youth organizations' mandatory programs that every German child participated in from age 10 onward. Initially, the programs had emphasized traditional gender roles, preparing girls for motherhood and domestic service. But as the war intensified and Germany's situation became desperate, the programs had shifted, becoming increasingly militarized, demanding that girls develop capabilities once reserved for boys. Physical training became central long marches, obstacle courses, endurance exercises designed to build strength and stamina. Girls learned weapons handling, first aid, fire suppression, all the skills that auxiliary forces needed as military-age men became scarce. They drilled in formation, learned to follow orders without question, absorbed ideology that emphasized duty over comfort, sacrifice over personal preference, collective needs over individual desires. And they were explicitly taught to suppress femininity. Dresses were prohibited after age 12, only trousers and practical clothing that allowed unrestricted movement. Makeup was forbidden as frivolous vanity. Long hair was discouraged, then banned, with shortcuts becoming mandatory. Girls who showed interest in traditional feminine activities, sewing decorative items, discussing boys, expressing concern about appearance faced public criticism for weakness and self-indulgence. We were told that Germany needed new women, Greta explained during her intake interview. Not weak women who cared about dresses and beauty, but strong women who could replace men in factories and farms, who could serve without complaint, who put nation before self. Femininity was redefined as liability, as leftover from weak societies that Germany was replacing with something harder, more efficient. The interviewer, a psychologist named Dr. Helen Werner, asked careful questions documenting not just what had happened, but how the girls understood their experiences, what beliefs they'd internalized, what damage had been done to their sense of identity and self. "Did you want to be feminine?" Werner asked. "Before the training, did you like dresses and pretty things?" Greta's face showed conflict memory, fighting against conditioning, natural impulses struggling against years of instruction. "I don't remember clearly. I was 10 when the programs became mandatory, when the old curriculum was replaced. I think I liked dolls, maybe dresses. My mother sewed me a blue dress for Easter when I was 9. But after joining the youth organization, those preferences were trained away. We learned that such desires were shameful, that girls who wanted to be pretty were failing to serve, were being selfish when the nation needed every person's full capability. And you believe this? Accepted it as truth?" Everyone believed it. The instructors, the other girls, our parents who'd been taught similar messages. It wasn't belief exactly. It was simply how things were, like gravity or weather. Not questioned because questioning seemed pointless or dangerous. Werner documented this carefully, recognizing that she was witnessing systematic conditioning, ideology that had colonized consciousness, beliefs that had replaced natural developmental processes with manufactured identity designed to serve institutional needs. Mitchell consulted with Werner about how to approach the clothing situation. The girls needed dresses and feminine clothing. Their current outfits were inadequate for civilian life, marked them as different, prevented them from blending into normal social environments. But forcing them to wear dresses might reinforce trauma, might feel like another authority figure demanding compliance, might trigger resistance rooted in years of conditioning. "We need to make femininity feel safe," Werner said. "These girls have been taught that looking female makes them vulnerable, that showing gender makes them targets. They need to see that American women can be feminine and strong simultaneously, that dresses don't equal weakness, that femininity isn't incompatible with capability." They developed a strategy. Female staff members would model different approaches to femininity, some wearing dresses, some wearing trousers, some mixing masculine and feminine elements, demonstrating that women could choose how to present themselves without those choices determining their worth or capability. The dresses would be available, but not mandatory. Girls could select them if they wanted, could try them on in private, could experiment with femininity at their own pace without pressure or judgment. And crucially, they'd create contexts where femininity felt safe rather than dangerous, where wearing dresses didn't make girls vulnerable, but instead connected them to community, to normalcy, to the possibility of lives defined by something other than service and sacrifice. The breakthrough began with the youngest girl, Liesl Hoffman, who was 13. She'd been watching American teenage girls at a nearby community center, observing how they moved, how they talked, how they wore dresses casually, as if femininity was natural rather than forbidden. One afternoon, she approached Mitchell tentatively, her face showing the fear of someone asking for something they've been taught is shameful. "May I try dress?" she asked in broken English. "Just to see. Not to keep, just to know how it feels." Mitchell felt her eyes water, but maintained calm professionalism. "Of course. Let's find one that fits you." They went to the clothing room together, Liesl moving carefully, as if approaching something dangerous. Mitchell pulled several dresses in appropriate sizes, simple styles, nothing too elaborate, practical enough to feel safe, but pretty enough to feel special. Liesl touched the fabrics tentatively, her scarred fingers marked by years of hard labor and training exercise, is running over cotton and linen and soft wool. Her expression showed wonder mixed with grief, as if she was remembering something she'd lost and only now realized was missing. "In Germany, such fabrics were not available," she said quietly. "Everything went to military. Civilians received rough materials, practical but ugly. And girls in youth programs received worst of all heavy wool that scratched, thick cotton that didn't breathe. We were told comfort was weakness, that accepting discomfort built character. Try this one," Mitchell suggested, offering a simple blue dress with small white flowers. "It should fit, and the color would suit you." Liesl took the dress behind a privacy screen. Mitchell heard rustling, long silence, then a small sound that might have been crying. She waited patiently, giving the girl time to process whatever emotions were emerging. When Liesl emerged, she wore the dress and tears streamed down her face. The garment fit reasonably well, a bit loose in places where malnutrition had left her thinner than the dress anticipated, but the transformation was striking. She looked like a 13-year-old girl rather than a small soldier, her body's natural shape visible, her femininity no longer hidden behind shapeless military clothing. "I forgot," Liesl whispered, staring at her reflection in the mirror Mitchell provided. "I forgot that I am girl. For 3 years, I was told to be hard, to be strong, to eliminate softness. And I learned so well that I forgot what I looked like before. Who I was before training replaced my personality with approved behaviors and beliefs." She touched the dress fabric, smoothed it over her hips, turned slightly to see how the skirt moved. "Is it permitted?" she asked, her voice small. "Am I allowed to like this? Am I allowed to feel pretty rather than capable, to care about appearance rather than just performance?" "Yes," Mitchell said firmly. "You're allowed to like it. You're allowed to feel pretty. You're allowed to care about how you look, without that meaning you're weak or selfish. Those were lies you were told to make you easier to control, to eliminate parts of your personality that didn't serve the people who wanted to use you." Word spread among the other girls that Liesl had tried on a dress, that she'd been permitted to wear it, that no punishment had followed. Over the next few days, others began approaching Mitchell, asking tentatively if they too might try the forbidden clothing, might experiment with the femininity they'd been taught to eliminate. Each girl's first encounter with a dress was emotional, raw, marked by tears and confusion and the painful process of reconnecting with parts of themselves that had been suppressed. They stood before mirrors, seeing bodies they'd learned to hide, curves they'd been taught to obscure, forms they'd been trained to treat as obstacles rather than as natural features of female development. Greta tried on a green dress that made her look older, more sophisticated, closer to the young woman she would have become if war hadn't interrupted development. She stared at her reflection for a long time, her face showing the conflict between conditioning and natural preference, between what she'd been taught she should be and what she might want to become. "I was told that femininity makes you victim," she said quietly, Mitchell standing nearby as witness and support. "That in a dangerous world, looking like woman makes you target for violence. That smart girls eliminate female appearance, blend with men, become invisible as females so they can be safe. Was that true?" Mitchell asked. "Did hiding your gender make you safer?" Greta's expression darkened. "No, we were not safe regardless. The training did not protect us from harm. It only taught us to accept harm without complaint, to view suffering as duty rather than as abuse. Hiding femininity didn't prevent violence. It just taught us that our femaleness was something shameful, something to conceal, something that made us less valuable than boys who never had to hide their gender to be worthy of respect." She touched the dress fabric, her movements careful, as if the cloth might burn. "This is dangerous for different reason. Not because it makes me target, but because wearing it means accepting. I am female, that femininity is part of who I am, that I cannot eliminate this aspect of self, no matter how much training tried to erase it. That terrifies me more than any physical danger." Dr. Werner organized group sessions where the girls could discuss their experiences together, process their trauma collectively, begin the difficult work of questioning beliefs that had structured their identities for crucial developmental years. The discussions revealed the depth of conditioning they'd undergone, a systematic effort to reshape consciousness, the particular ways that totalitarian systems had colonized their sense of self and possibility. "We were taught that there are two types of women," one girl explained. "Weak women who care about beauty and comfort, who want dresses and romance and soft lives. And strong women who serve the nation, who sacrifice personal preferences for collective good, who eliminate femininity to become useful. We were told constantly that only weak societies tolerate weak women, that Germany's future depended on creating new type of female who was hard, capable, willing to do what soft women could not." Another added, "The training was constant, reinforced daily through every interaction. Girls who showed feminine interests were criticized publicly, called frivolous or vain. Girls who excelled at masculine tasks, who could march farthest, carry heaviest loads, demonstrate greatest endurance, were praised as models of proper development. We learned to measure ourselves against standards designed for boys, to feel inadequate when we couldn't match male performance, to see our female bodies as obstacles rather than as normal variations in human form." A third girl, older, nearly 18. "The worst part was how thoroughly we internalized these messages. After years of conditioning, I genuinely believed femininity was weakness. When I felt desire to wear pretty things or be treated gently, I interpreted those feelings as character flaws, as evidence that I was failing to serve properly. The regime didn't just control our behavior, it colonized our consciousness, made us police ourselves, made us enforce our own subordination while believing it was strength." Werner documented these testimonies, recognizing their value as historical record, but also as therapeutic exercise. Speaking these experiences aloud, hearing others validate them, beginning to analyze critically rather than just accepting, these were necessary steps toward recovery, toward rebuilding identities that had been systematically dismantled and replaced with manufactured versions designed to serve institutional purposes. As weeks passed, the girls slowly began wearing dresses more regularly. Not all of them, not all the time. Some needed longer to feel safe. Some preferred mixed clothing that incorporated both masculine and feminine elements. Some struggled with body image issues that years of suppressing gender awareness had created. But gradually, tentatively, they started experimenting with femininity, as if discovering a foreign language. learning grammar and vocabulary for expressing aspects of themselves they'd been forbidden to acknowledge. They asked Mitchell and other female staff about makeup, about how to style hair that was growing out from mandatory short cuts, about what colors suited different complexions, about all the small skills that girls typically learned gradually from mothers and peers, but that these girls had been denied during crucial years. The questions were often heartbreaking in their basicality. "How do you know if a dress fits properly?" one girl asked. "We were only taught to check if uniforms allowed free movement for work. I don't know how to evaluate whether clothing is flattering, what that even means." Another, "Is it permitted to care about appearance? To want to look pretty rather than just functional?" We were taught such concerns were selfish, that appearance should only matter for presenting proper image of discipline and capability. A third, "Do American girls wear dresses because they want to, or because they are required to? Is femininity a choice here, or is it another set of rules we must follow to be acceptable?" Mitchell and the other staff answered patiently, modeling different approaches, emphasizing that femininity was choice rather than obligation, that women could define their own relationship with gender presentation, that there was no single correct way to be female. The transformation was most visible during a community event in June, organized by local churches to welcome displaced children and help them integrate into American social life. The German girls were invited, encouraged to attend, offered support in navigating what would be their first exposure to normal teenage social activities in years. Most of them chose to wear dresses, not because they felt they had to, but because they wanted to see what it felt like to present as obviously, unmistakably female in a social context, to test whether their conditioning had been accurate about femininity, making them vulnerable, or whether it had been propaganda designed to control them. Liesel wore her blue dress, the one she'd first tried on, which Mitchell had helped alter to fit better. She'd let her hair grow slightly, had experimented with a simple hairstyle that made her look more her age, less like the small soldier she'd been trained to be. Greta wore a more sophisticated dress, burgundy with subtle details, appropriate for a 17-year-old young woman. She'd struggled most with the choice, had changed her mind multiple times, had required extensive reassurance that wearing feminine clothing didn't mean accepting weakness, didn't make her vulnerable, didn't betray the strength she'd developed despite the harmful context in which that strength had been cultivated. They arrived at the community center together, moving in their familiar formation years of drilling had made walking in synchronized groups feel natural. But as they entered and saw American teenagers socializing casually, saw girls in dresses talking and laughing without military bearing or collective discipline, something shifted in their posture, their awareness, their understanding of what teenage life could look like. American teenagers approached them, friendly and curious, asking about Germany, about their journey to America, about their experiences. The German girls responded tentatively at first, uncertain how to engage in casual social interaction after years when all conversations had been structured around duty and service. But gradually they relaxed. They discovered that wearing dresses didn't make them targets for ridicule or violence. They experienced being treated as teenage girls rather than as young soldiers or as problems requiring management. They participated in activities, dancing, games, conversation that had been absent from their lives during years when every moment had been structured around training and preparation for service. Mitchell watched from across the room, tears running down her face as she witnessed the small Miracle 12 girls who'd been systematically stripped of femininity, who'd been taught to hide their gender and suppress natural development, who'd internalized beliefs that their femaleness was liability and obstacle, now laughing and dancing and simply being teenagers in dresses, reclaiming parts of themselves that ideology had tried to eliminate. But the recovery wasn't linear or complete. The conditioning had been too deep, too sustained, too reinforced by every institution and authority they'd encountered during formative years. They carried psychological scars that dresses couldn't erase, beliefs that persisted despite intellectual understanding that they'd been false. One girl, Anna, had a breakdown at the community event. She'd been dancing, laughing, appearing to enjoy herself. Then suddenly she was crying in a bathroom, hyperventilating, her body rigid with panic. Werner found her, sat beside her, offered presence without demanding explanation. Eventually, Anna could speak. "I felt happy," she whispered, her voice broken. "Wearing pretty dress, dancing with boy who smiled at me, feeling normal and feminine and young. And then I felt guilty, as if happiness was betrayal, as if enjoying femininity meant I was weak and selfish and failing to serve. The conditioning is still there, still telling me that soft feelings are character flaws, that any moment of pleasure or beauty is moment stolen from duty and sacrifice. The conditioning lied to you," Werner said gently. "Happiness isn't betrayal. Femininity isn't weakness. Enjoying yourself doesn't make you selfish. Those were tools used to control you, to make you compliant, to prevent you from questioning or resisting. Recognizing they were lies doesn't make them disappear immediately, but it's the beginning of unlearning, of building new beliefs based on truth rather than on manipulation." Anna nodded but continued crying, releasing years of suppressed emotion, grieving for the childhood she'd lost, for the development that had been interrupted, for the girl she might have been if ideology hadn't colonized her consciousness during the years when identity forms. The 12 German girls were eventually placed with foster families or group homes across the Northeast, integrated into schools and communities, given opportunities to rebuild lives that war and ideology had damaged. Their recoveries varied. Some adjusted relatively quickly. Others struggled for years with psychological effects that never fully resolved. Liesel Hoffman was fostered by a family in Pennsylvania, completed high school, attended college, became a social worker specializing in trauma and displacement. She never fully escaped the conditioning she'd received between ages 10 and 13, never completely eliminated the voice in her head that whispered that femininity was weakness and comfort was indulgence. But she learned to recognize those thoughts as artifacts rather than truth, as damage rather than insight, as beliefs installed by people who wanted to use her rather than beliefs she'd chosen for herself. She married in 1955, had 3 daughters, raised them with fierce determination that they would experience childhood as normal, development rather than as preparation for service, that they would learn joy before duty, that their worth wouldn't depend on suppressing femininity to prove capability. She kept the blue dress, the one Mitchell had given her, the first dress she'd worn after years in rough military clothing. It hung in her closet too small for her adult body, but preserved as a reminder of what had been taken, of what she'd reclaimed, of the possibility that even profound damage could be partially healed through patience and support, and refusal to accept that conditioning determined destiny. Greta Schneider struggled more visibly with reintegration. The conditioning had gone deepest in her, the internalization most complete, the beliefs most resistant to challenge. She found civilian life disorienting, missed the structure and clarity of military discipline, felt lost without clear objectives and measurable standards of performance. She joined the military herself in 1950, serving in the newly formed Women's Army Corps, finding in American military service something that accommodated both her need for structure and her right to femininity. She wore uniform during duty hours, civilian dresses during leave, learned that she could be both strong and feminine, both capable and female, that these weren't contradictions, but simply different aspects of complete human identity. She retired in 1975, after 25 years of service, having achieved rank and recognition that would have been impossible in the system that had damaged her. In interviews about her career, she always emphasized how different American military culture was from the youth programs she'd experienced in Germany. "In Germany, I was taught I had to eliminate femininity to be useful," she said. "In America, I learned that usefulness and femininity were unrelated, that I could be effective soldier while also being unmistakably female, that my gender was simply characteristic rather than liability, or asset that capability came from training and character, rather than from suppressing natural aspects of self. Dr. Werner published extensively about the German girls' cases, documenting the systematic conditioning they'd undergone, analyzing techniques used to reshape consciousness, contributing to understanding of how totalitarian systems damage psychology through colonizing identity itself. Her work influenced entire generations of psychologists and educators, shaped policies about how displaced children should be received and treated, contributed to recognition that recovery from ideological conditioning requires more than just physical safety. It requires patient support for rebuilding beliefs, for questioning what seemed unquestionable, for reclaiming parts of self that were suppressed or eliminated. In her final book, published shortly before her death in 1987, Werner reflected on what the German girls had taught her. They arrived believing femininity was weakness, that dresses made them vulnerable, that their worth depended on suppressing gender to demonstrate capability. These beliefs seemed fixed, unshakable, fundamental to their identity. But beneath the conditioning, their natural development persisted suppressed, but not eliminated, damaged, but not destroyed. When given safety and support and permission to question what they'd been taught, they began the painful work of reclaiming their femininity, of rebuilding identities that included rather than excluded their femaleness. This taught me that even the most thorough conditioning can be resisted, that human consciousness is more resilient than ideologies that try to reshape it, that recovery is possible even after profound damage, though it requires patience, expertise, and community. Support that refuses to accept that damage is permanent. Sarah Mitchell continued relief work for decades, helping thousands of displaced children rebuild lives after trauma. The German girls remained special in her memory, not because their suffering was worse than others, though it was certainly severe, but because their case revealed how ideology could weaponize gender itself, could turn femininity into something shameful, could make girls feel that their female bodies were obstacles requiring elimination, rather than natural features deserving acceptance. She saved photographs from the community event images showing the girls in dresses, laughing, dancing, simply being teenagers. The contrast between these photos and the intake documentation that showed them in military clothing, rigid and expressionless, was stark. Same girls, weeks apart, but transformed by permission to be female, by safety that allowed suppressed development to resume, by the simple revolutionary act of putting on dresses and discovering that femininity didn't make them weak or vulnerable, but instead connected them to parts of themselves that conditioning had tried to erase. Before she died in 1992, Mitchell donated her papers to a research archive documenting displaced persons' experiences. Among the documents was a letter from Lisau, written in 1960. "I still have the blue dress you gave me. It hangs in my closet, too small for me now, but preserved as reminder of the day I learned I was allowed to be girl again, that the conditioning which had taught me to hide my gender was propaganda rather than truth. That dress represents more than clothing. It represents possibility that damage isn't permanent, that what was taken can be partially reclaimed, that even after years of being taught that femininity is weakness, I could learn that femininity is simply aspect of who I am, neither strength nor weakness, but just reality, requiring neither suppression nor shame. Thank you for seeing past our conditioning to the girls beneath, for offering us dresses when we'd been trained to refuse them, for patience while we learned to accept ourselves as female, after years of being taught that femaleness was obstacle rather than identity." In displaced persons archives across America and Europe, documentation exists of the systematic effort to militarize German childhood, to eliminate aspects of personality and identity that didn't serve institutional purposes, to reshape consciousness according to ideological specifications. Girls who were taught to hide their gender, who learned that femininity was weakness, and dresses were forbidden, represent one example among thousands of how totalitarian systems damage children through colonizing their sense of self and possibility. But the archives also contain evidence of recovery photographs of girls in dresses, smiling tentatively, reconnecting with femininity they'd been taught to eliminate. Letters describing the painful process of unlearning conditioning, of questioning beliefs that had seemed unshakable, of rebuilding identities on more honest foundations. Testimonies from women who'd been those girls who'd grown up carrying both the damage and the resilience, who'd learned that even profound conditioning could be resisted, and that human consciousness was more durable than the ideologies that tried to reshape it. The blue dress still exists, preserved in a museum documenting refugee experiences. It hangs behind glass, labeled with Liesel's story, the girl who'd been taught that dresses were forbidden, who'd learned that femininity was weakness, who'd encountered Americans offering feminine clothing and had to relearn that accepting it was ain't betrayal but reclamation, wasn't weakness, but permission to be whole rather than the fragment that ideology had tried to make her. Visitors read the description and see a simple dress, cotton with small flowers, practical but pretty, the kind of garment that thousands of girls wore in 1945. But they also see what it represented, the possibility that damage isn't permanent, that conditioning can be questioned, that girls who were taught to hide their gender could learn to accept their femininity without shame. That recovery was possible even after systematic attempts to eliminate core aspects of identity. The dress hangs in its case. The story endures. And both serve as reminders that when systems try to reshape children according to ideological specifications, when they teach girls that femininity is weakness and dresses are forbidden, when they colonize consciousness and eliminate aspects of self that don't serve institutional purposes, even then, human development persists beneath the surface, waiting for safety and permission to resume, proving that what seems destroyed is often only suppressed, that given support and patience, recovery can happen, that the dresses we retold we cannot wear sometimes become the symbols of reclaiming what was taken, of rebuilding what was damaged, of accepting ourselves as we are, rather than as ideology insists we should be.